I've been thinking about you lately. You've been on my mind, on my mind.
I'm sure you guys are wondering why I gathered you all here. This is my presentation, Time Crisis, 3 defensive drills for crunch time. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Pape Lukk. I'm an assistant coach at Colby College, and I currently serve as the defensive coordinator there. So first and foremost, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge everybody that made this possible, starting with the IMLCA, all of the partners, and then obviously the Omni, which is a fantastic spot. My beautiful wife, Dr. Alyssa Henry, who, without I wouldn't be able to do this and coach a kid's game for a living. So I'm forever grateful to her and everything that she's provided me and our family. Coach Van Arsdale, for giving me my shot at Colby. Coach Bernhardt, Casey Dowd, and obviously this list is really, really long, but just a few quick acknowledgements of Ben DeLuca, Matt Rakowski, Trey Wilkes, Nick Taylor, Brandon Geldart, Nate Babcock, Tommy Pierce, and then the Fireside crew for rocking with me every Thursday. So I appreciate you guys more than you know. But with this, I want you guys to take everything I'm about to tell you with a grain of salt, because I know the joke, with being a defensive coordinator in the NESCAC, kind of like the old Starburst commercials, like it is inherently a juicy contradiction. So with that, I'm not going to tell you guys anything today that you haven't seen before, not going to reinvent the wheel, but I think it is really important to get into the methodology with everything, understand the thought process as far as, practice planning goes, the constraints that goes into practice. And all that stuff. But obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't poke a little fun at myself in the position I currently find myself. But getting right into it here with the planning considerations, especially for us at Colby right now, being, a high academic institution, the past couple of years, we haven't had fall ball. So you'll have to bear with me because I'm a state school guy. But having 10 practices this year and 16 days we were allowed to work with the guys as opposed to 0 is a lot more. So we were really excited about that. But with that being said, like any other institution, we do have considerations. So especially as you guys go through this, do you have half the field? Are you splitting the field with another team? Women's lacrosse might be there for the first 30 minutes or whatever it may be. And then timing, like you don't have the full 2 hours. I think additionally for everyone that's been an assistant coach and, those that are fortunate enough to be head coaches, how that head coach time works, where that 5-minute slot turns into a 25-minute slot, and then you're kind of playing catch up on the back end. So being able to roll with the punches, I think, is essential to what we're doing. The time of the year for us, again, like I said before, we were really fortunate to have fall ball this year, which was awesome. But the way I try to conceptualize it, and I was really cognizant of this year, the lessons or the emphasis that we want our guys to take away from the next 5 months. I'm the son of a coach, so if you guys came here for quotes, you're going to get your money's worth in a little bit. But I think it is really important to have, that lasting legacy or that, closing thought going forward and what those guys are going to have for the next 5 months. So definitely something to keep in the back of your mind is like how that's going to impact, when coaches aren't around or, the next, 3 to 5 months, whatever it may be. Additionally, with that, kind of like the presentation is titled, really want to be cognizant of our deadline. For us, we'll have our first organized team activity or practice on February 5th, and then we'll turn around 26 days later. And we open up with Wesleyan, who I'm sure will be, a top 20 team, if not a top 10 team. So obviously we have our work cut out for us, but it is really important to understand, with that time window, what do you absolutely have to have as far as, concepts, schemes, all that stuff. And I think, the biggest thing I want you to take away from this is we don't want to manufacture robots. We don't want guys that are cookie cutter. We want lacrosse players. And I think all these drills are going to touch on everything that you need to be a complete defenseman and develop these guys holistically. Another consideration that we need to be cognizant of is our roster size. At Colby, we are really fortunate to carry a larger roster. But the injury bug happens to us like it does everybody else. But one of the interesting considerations for us too is the vast majority of our junior class will go abroad. I think we have like 12 or 13 guys out of a 14-man class that are abroad right now. So that's something too where that roster looks great on paper, but then it just continues to shrink. So you have to get creative with what you're doing. And with that, a lot of the things that I do, I'll actively incorporate our goalies into our drills, first and foremost from a roster perspective, But also, I think with them, being the low man on the totem pole for a lot of years, or my more formative years in my coaching career, it is really important to eliminate that goalie dead time. And goalies are people too. They can pass and catch and do all that stuff, so they don't need to be relegated to the sideline. Another thing for us, as far as the considerations are concerned, at Colby, we have something called incursions, and basically that just breaks down to the academic workload where a professor can have, 3 to 5 times a year. If you have an 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. class, they could say, hey, we're going to have an out of class exam at 5 o'clock. So that continues to shrink your roster. So again, being creative, being flexible with all that stuff and taking all those considerations in is exceedingly important. And then the next thing that I wanted to touch on, and for you guys, the question that I want to pose is how do your players learn best? I'm fortunate enough to be married to a psychologist, and I also did my master's degree in secondary education. So with that, one of the things that you need to be cognizant of is that first 8 seconds, especially with this generation. And I know I sound like the old man in the room, but that first 8 seconds, and kind of one of the things that I've coined is you want to teach the group while being considerate of the individual. And that brings me to my next point of, it's a two-way street with your players. We've been fortunate enough to have a lot of great speakers this weekend and talking about that player relationship where you don't want your players to view, or come into your office as like going to the principal's office. You want to have that two-way street and that open and honest communication. So one of the things that Coach Dowd and I have done this past fall is that we create Google Forms and stuff like that. And it's just a series of questions, how do you learn best? What did you like about this aspect of practice? And, they're more icebreakers than anything, but it starts that conversation. And then you understand if somebody is a, super visual learner, or, they need to walk through things, whatever their strengths are, you can cater to that. So you're not just banging your head against the wall. And then they also have that feedback, which I think is really, really important. So the method to the madness, something for me, I've been fortunate to have a lot of different stops. And my first stop at a really academic-centric place was Haverford College under Nick Taylor, and learned a lot of really good things from him. And he's one of my big mentors. But especially at the high academic schools, or really just young people in general nowadays, is answering the why. So the things I like to think about with this is you want to be firm, fair, and demanding. Guys are always going to ask questions, right? And that's part of the process, and you need to invite that. So, they're in a spot where they feel like they have ownership, they understand what's going on, they can ask about tweaks or adjustments, whatever it may be. But it's a fine line, because you don't want guys to start poking holes. And then as soon as a guy pokes a hole, the proverbial floodgates open. So it is really important, like I said, to be firm, fair, and demanding with that. Understand the expectation. You're not telling guys we're doing this because I said so. And at the end of the day, too, it is a humbling experience as a coach, but they may have a question that you've just never heard before. So there's nothing wrong with, saying like, hey, let me think about it. I'll get back to you. I think that makes you a little bit more personable and also shows that you're able to work with those guys. So like I said, if you came for quotes, you're certainly in for it this morning. But we want to be short and sweet. And my dad was my football coach, which has had an irreparable impact on my life, as I'm sure you guys can see. But one of the things that he still says to this day is that do not give direction that can be understood. Give direction that cannot be misunderstood. So with that, I'm not going to get into all the philosophical things with that, but I think that is something to be cognizant of and be mindful. When you talk, you want to have your directions be as clear as they can, and really put the onus on you as a coach to not give directions that can be misunderstood. And then I know I touched on it briefly, but the player development piece, the big thing that I'm going to show you with all of these drills is that everything that they're going to do can be easily replicated without staff around. So for our situation, guys that have smaller rosters, we are fortunate enough to have like somewhat of a captain's practice, that started at the end of fall, and we'll go through our Jan plan and stuff like that. But everything I'm going to show you, like, you don't need a coach there. Like, are the points of emphasis going to be the same? Is the cadence going to be the same? Is necessarily the tempo? Not necessarily, but it is really important to have that and, provide your guys an outlet with things that they can do on their own. And then in that same breath, we'll get into it a little bit here, but just have those limited points of emphasis. I'm certainly somebody that can be pretty long-winded, and I like to talk, but I've really tried to, cut down and have 2 to 3 points of emphasis. I think, that puts you in a really good spot to be able to get out in front and really hammer home those 2 or 3 things, as opposed to, we got to do this, we got to do that, and you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. So really just being cognizant and being concise with what you're doing. So with this, want to be purposeful with everything that we do. The points of emphasis, like I talked about, and here's another quote for you guys. But we want to keep that to 2 to 3. And I know I said it before, but it's not what you teach, it's what you emphasize. And I think with that, again, we don't want to develop robots. We don't want to develop guys that are cookie cutter. We want to develop lacrosse players. So it is those points of emphasis, those things that they can rely on. And selfishly, as a coach, one of the coolest things that I like living vicariously through these guys is, I'll say like sit in the chair or whatever, and then you go through the reps a couple of times and you hear the seniors telling the first years or the first years telling the sophomores or whatever. So I think that part of it's really, really cool just from a selfish perspective. Again, with the time constrictions or time restrictions, I should say, I think it is really important when you talk about doing these drills and how you're going to implement them is the overview of the fall of, hey, we have 10 days. So we want to hit this, on day 2 and 3. And then by 6 and 7, we should be doing this, or the same thing in the fall, especially with us. It is an exceedingly quick turnaround. 26 days flies by, especially, pardon me, when 2 of those or one of those is scrimmage days and things like that. I alluded to my education background before, but one of the things that, Coach Dowd is here, and he's heard me say this ad nauseum, but constraint-based learning is definitely something that's huge for our program. In the education world, that would be called scaffolding. So what we want to do is we want to have different iterations of the same drill. I was actually having a conversation with another coach this morning, and like I said before, I'm not going to show you guys anything today that hasn't been done, and I certainly don't take credit for it. It's just my spin on things. But you want to continue to make those practices fun, entertaining, and then throw a different caveat in it, right? Like challenge your guys to learn. I think the best way I can describe it to you guys is we're not going to talk about pick play today, but this fall, we just went through everything. We switched everything, we doubled everything, we got through everything. We got a piece, whatever it may be, but challenge your guys. And I think with that, you figure out, what you're good at, and each team is going to be different. So just another consideration to be cognizant of. Reps. This is something for me that I was definitely guilty of in my more formative years, and I definitely catch myself doing it now, but you can't joystick it, right? Teach more during film, allow guys to make mistakes, and you don't have to be a traffic cone, right? You want to talk guys through what they did wrong, have that immediate feedback, which is super important to this generation. But again, it's not like one guy doesn't punch a stick to the inside and you stop the drill and you talk about everything. Pull them out, talk to them, but get those reps going. And, that muscle memory, all that stuff adds up. And then last but not least, we certainly want to have a critical eye with all this stuff. As coaches, we really want to understand, we like this part of the drill or we're going to scrap this. I think a lot of times, lacrosse isn't played on a whiteboard and things look great on Instagram, or, you go to a coach's presentation, you're like, that looks awesome. And then you go to run it with your guys and it's absolutely hate this part of it. So, not being afraid to make mistakes and just learn and tweak and, make those drills work best for you guys in your program. And then I said it before, you certainly want to have player feedback to a point. There's sometimes where guys will come off and they'll be like, what the heck are we doing? Or I don't understand this. And you can foster those conversations. But again, I think it is really important to have player feedback to a point, because as we all know, if they got to run the show, it'd just be a lot of sixes and shooting drills and things like that. So want to put ourselves in a position to be successful. But with that being said, we're kind of going to get into the meat of the presentation now. So the first drill I'm going to talk to you guys about is our spoke and poke drill. So basically the way to conceptualize this is it's spoke passing with a twist. And the big points that we want to get out of this is we want to have competent sticks and solid feet. So there's going to be 2 groups that go from this, and I'll have a field layout, so I'll be able to show you guys, and then we'll have some clips as well. But our defensive points of emphasis, again, want to keep to those 2 to 3, not make it overly complicated, short and sweet. We want to approach under control. One of the big things that I've picked up in my coaching career is I always want to have these little sayings that guys can, cling on to. And one of the big ones for that is big steps, little steps. So we get out, we've got our big steps. And then as we approach and we break down under control, we've got our little steps, we get our feet under us, all that good stuff. And then something too, just to help them conceptualize is, we want to sit in that chair, right? So little things that they can hold on to. And like I said before, it is really cool when you start to hear guys using your verbiage and coaching other guys up the way that you've been coaching them. Again, with this, the second point of emphasis is that we want to have our stick out in front. So something I like to say all the time is, give them something to dodge. Like in our program, we talk about looking the part, which I'll get into a little bit later. But I'm a huge fan of greeter checks, and that can certainly be another presentation on its own. But we want to have our stick out in front. We want to look like a college defenseman at all times. And then last but not least, for a defensive point of emphasis, the communication piece is really broad. But for our guys in our program, when you address the ball carrier, you have a loud mind call. And what I think this does is it kickstarts everything we're doing. This will be a startup drill that we do. We get approaches, we get stick work, but that mind call is absolutely essential because you establish who has the ball. Then you can, when we build on that, you have your hot call, your two, your fill, whatever it may be. But you practice how you play, and that's something for us that point of emphasis, like that's a non-negotiable. You need to talk through all that, and if this is the first drill that you do coming out, it really sets the tone for practice. So I think that's really important. Our offensive points of emphasis here, want to take pride in our stick work, throw hard passes. For better or worse, I'm a big Philadelphia Flyers guy. So, obviously a fun year like always, but I like to think in hockey terms, and especially when I've been fortunate enough to coach Canadians, as soon as you say +1, -1 or good shift, like their ears perk up and they get really excited. But we always want to be in that +1. I've been around some programs where, we've had stick standards to the point where if a player drops a pass and they know it was their fault, they hit the ground, they do a push-up. That's something that coming from a coach can be really tough to put into action. It's really about your seniors and your culture buying in. But I think that's something for us. Like we never want clearing to be an adventure. And probably the best euphemism I can give you guys is like, you wouldn't show up to swim practice if you couldn't swim, right? So it's the same thing with lacrosse. Not everybody's always going to be the biggest, fastest, strongest, smartest, but there's absolutely nothing stopping you, regardless of position, from having the best stick on the field. So that's certainly just one concession I can't make, and not to go down the rabbit hole with that, but I think that's really important. In that same breath, with the proper mechanics, passing can't be an adventure. Like I said, soft hands, quiet stick. We want to be exceedingly confident with our sticks, and this is a great way to get that started. And again, with this too, I'm not so stuck in my ways that like everything has to be overhand. We'll challenge our guys. There's caveats on both sides, but not everything's going to be overhand. We might have our guys roll away and throw underneath or something, throw behind the backs, whatever it may be, mix it up. But I don't want the first time that they do that to be, when we're up by 1 with 30 seconds left in a conference tournament game and we're trying to clear the ball, right? So encourage that creativity, allow your guys to, kind of put their hand on the proverbial stove because it is practice and that's the time to get better. Last but not least, again, the communication aspect, like every pass gets communicated. And for us, we have our one more call, our right away call, whatever it may be. But especially for those first years and those guys that are assimilating into your program, that's something too that you want to get out of their heads of them being like, yo, one more. It's like, use our terms. And this is a great time. They're going to get tons of touches, tons of reps. So that communication goes both ways. So obviously you guys can tell I'm not an artist, but bear with me here with all this. So the way this will work, this certainly isn't gospel as far as where all these cones are located, but you want to go roughly 10 yards and then, a little bit outside the hashes. But what'll happen is just your typical spoke passing drill to start. This offensive player designated with this X with the over-exaggerated lacrosse stick will start with the ball. He'll move that on. And again, you can do whatever you want with that. You can catch right, throw crossbody. You can catch right, roll away left, whatever it may be. We have I try not to have the same pattern every time because as you can imagine, you're doing this multiple times a week or over the course of the season, it can get kind of stagnant. So you want to continue to mix it up. With that being said too, there are considerations for our defensemen inside. I teach a few different approaches at Colby. The one that I'm most fond of is like that flat or that basketball approach. So you'll see that in the drill as well. But you can also have that caveat where it's like, hey, we're going to make him a righty. We're going to make him a lefty, take away top side, underneath, whatever it may be. So again, that constraint-based learning and challenge your guys. And you'll see that we do it incorrectly a few times here, but that's practice and that's part of getting through it. But with that being said, basically what will happen, this ball will move, we'll get a good approach, we'll move it on, and then we'll just replace defense to offense to out. And generally speaking with that, there's a lot of points of emphasis with this. But again, trying to keep it to those 2 to 3, and we'll let this roll, and I'll kind of talk through it, and then I'll play it back so you guys can see it without my voice as well. Obviously with this, it is a lot easier. I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on this if you don't have a physical implement to contend with, but hindsight's 20/20. So as you'll see, we're here. And the other big thing with that is we've got our goalies in here. I think it is really applicable too, because, at least in my mind, hopefully you're not in that position too many times, but you're going to be down by one. You need to pull the guy out of the cage. It really presents an opportunity for you to teach your goalies, what an approach looks like, and all that good stuff. But as you can see, we start to figure it out here a little bit. And obviously a lot of balls on the inside here just to have more reps. But good job, rolling away, all that good stuff. And just a few points of emphasis that I wanted to point out. We do it incorrectly here for a second. As this ball moves, we're kind of cheating the drill here a little bit. But I did want to take time and give a shout out to my man, Preston Mays, number 35 here. One of the things that you'll notice, and you guys wouldn't know unless you played us or you know Preston, but Preston's a natural righty. I teach our guys to switch hands and have their stick to the inside. If you want to play cross-handed, completely up to you. But one of those things with having a fall, I wanted to put that in their head early and often. So, and Preston is a great example of being exceedingly coachable. I told him that one time, and he does it all the time now, which is awesome. He's gotten comfortable to the point where if he does get a nugget, he can pick up a ground ball with his left hand, which I think is awesome. Not all of your guys have to be able to do that, but I think, again, with the time considerations that we have, he's able to do that. And, in the instances where I'm not around, he's doing that on his own, which is awesome. But you'll see Preston here. He's got his stick to the inside. Does a good job switching hands, breaking down. And again, like I said, you can vary that, roll away, throw crossbody, whatever it may be. But I just think with this, even if we have like 5 minutes or so, you get so many reps with this. And then also the goalie piece, being able to supplement like a smaller roster or one that's been a little injury ridden, as well as having those guys abroad. So with that, I think it's really important to get creative with that stuff. But this is a drill that I saw a few summers ago, and it's become, a huge staple in everything that we do. And like I said, I think it touches on a lot of really good things. And we'll get out of this, maybe. All right. So the second drill that I want to show you guys is our alley clearing drill. The best way that I can conceptualize this is that it's clearing in a phone booth, I should say. I think this drill in a lot of ways is a microcosm of life, and the fact that it's all about effort. And what you're going to see, for us, we'll have two different teams, and I'll talk you guys through the setup of what we're doing. But our clearing team's points of emphasis, this is a huge point of contention for me, and Coach Dowd has certainly seen me go through it this past fall. But when we do this, our first look is always up. I think, we as coaches, we always talk about wanting to play fast and getting the ball up and out. But, at the most rudimentary level, that starts with playing with your head up. So what tends to happen with this, and you guys will see in the clip, our guys kind of play the drill. And what I mean by that is because it's restricted to the alley, they'll catch it, and their first look is just for an overpass. And that certainly makes my blood boil to a bit. But you want to play with your head up, and your first look is always up to kind of kickstart that, have that home run pass. And again, it's not necessarily what you teach, it's what you emphasize. So every time we do this, it's, hey, look up, right? The spacing with this, we want to use the whole alley. We want to move without it. And I think for us, it is one of those really nice concepts that you can touch on in a smaller venue. But for our guys, it does teach those lessons and really hammer home those things of like, when we talk about the clearing game in a broader perspective, you don't want to stretch to get covered, right? You want to use that space that you have, not allow one to play two. And again, really being cognizant of that spacing, getting out of, your defender's shadow in the clearing aspect, and all that good stuff. And then last but not least, moving without it. Everybody's got different terms for it, but I tell our guys, like, we never want to get planted. You never want to be in the same spot for more than 3 seconds. If you're doing that, more often than not, you're doing something wrong. And then last but not least, like I talked about before, for a clearing team point of emphasis, we want to use our terms. We want to be loud, we want to be direct, and we want to over communicate. So one of the things I think that's, absolutely imperative with that is name. When we talk about pick play, which is obviously going on a different caveat, but I always tell the guys, name, direction, action, right? So with this, we have our terms. We want to, have that right away call or that one more. Call his name, give him the action. And that's, again, those points of emphasis that you can hammer home for your guys. For our riding team, their points of emphasis, like I said before, this is all about hustle. We're not going to make these guys sweat too much. We're going to put 20 seconds on the clock. But with that being said, they're going to have their poles, so we absolutely want to dial up the pressure. We want to fly around, and one of the caveats that I'll talk about with this is that for the sake of the drill, because it is inherently just a 3v2, we always need to jump the ball carrier. So whether that's the goalie, whether it's the defenseman on the wing, whatever it may be, whoever has the ball, we need to jump them and be able to go back and forth. So it is all about effort for those 20 seconds. And like I said, dial up the pressure. We're not throwing crazy checks. We're just, arriving under control with our stick out in front. But again, we want to get there, and we want to encourage those clearing guys to not be robots, and all that good stuff. But again, from a riding team perspective, we want to split. We want to see skips. I think with this, it's a really good drill for them to start to understand those concepts of passing lane awareness, like what that looks like. And ultimately with that, especially for younger defensemen, you can start to introduce that concept of dating, right? Being able to split those two, encouraging that pass, maybe taking a step or two off, off the far side defender so you can jump the goaltender or whatever it may be. But again, allowing them to make mistakes in like a, not mistake-free atmosphere, but something where, it's not life or death, and they can start to understand, their physical ability, their ability to get out in space and all that. And then with that, I know I talked about that acronym before, but LTP, that stands for Look the Part. So that is the brainchild of Nick Taylor at Princeton Day School, who, like I said, is a big mentor of mine. But we always want to look the part. We want to look like a college defenseman on and off the field. And when we talk about, playing defense or approaching, our sticks out in front, we're sitting in the chair, all that good stuff. And then off the ball, we never want to have our stick at our hip. We always want to be occupying a passing lane. And then, like I said before, for us, I'm a big stickler in having our stick to the inside. I encourage our guys to switch hands. If you want your guys to play cross-handed, completely up to you. The last point of emphasis for the riding team is being declarative. We want to be clear and concise with the communication. Again, it's that name in that direction, not being like, yo, one more, like Jimmy, one more, whatever it may be. And then, we always want to stay with our chest, right? That's a big thing for us, especially for young guys. I think they might not necessarily know what they're talking about, but if they're saying something, they're flying around, that breeds confidence. And then, for us, I always tell our guys, if you want to play, collegiately in general, but especially at Colby, you can't be quiet. That's not going to help your case. So getting into the setup with this, basically how this is we'll use the alley. And again, when I talk about like field constraints and stuff like that, this is something that I took away from my high school days, just because, we would split the field with women's lacrosse, and then, you have all your pretty boys, your offensive guys shooting here, and then your face-off guys doing whatever they're doing, and all that fun stuff. So, goalies and defensemen were kind of relegated to this box over here. But you'll have your bounds. Like I said before, you'll put 20 seconds on the clock. If you have a shot clock available, obviously that visual representation helps. And then again, it's not what you teach, it's what you emphasize. So the guys are able to consciously check and be like, okay, I got 10 seconds left. And then you can, work in your Gilman call or whatever, just being clock aware. But it'll be a 3-on-2. This figure with the lacrosse stick, we'll start with the ball. You've got a goalkeeper inside and then a defenseman. You can do this with 3D guys. When I was at Delaware, we were really fortunate to have 5 goalies. So I would just do this with goaltenders, which was it's quite a sight if you've never done it. And then we'll have 2 guys that are riding inside. And then as far as this goes, you'll go from defense to offense to out. So I think it is, really quick to get in, get reps, and be able to go from there. And then last but not least, the most important piece from a clearing perspective is that we want to have our forward outlet here. So this is our goalkeeper. What he's going to do is he's not going to get planted. He's not going to stand here. But as this ball swings, he's going to hunt the hashes. He can work up, he can work down, whatever it may be. But we'll tell him, for the sake of argument, after 12 seconds, anytime after 12 seconds, you can call for the ball. And that's our right away call. And we're going to get that ball up and out to you. So you constantly have that forward outlet or that upfield outlet. So again, we want to play fast and we want to put this into motion to the best of our ability. Yeah, and then we'll talk about these clips. So this one's a little brutal, so bear with me. This was from earlier in the fall, but as you can see, kind of the caveat that we had set up here, if I can do this. So again, my man Preston Mays, when we talk about the riding perspective, we're always going to jump the ball carrier. So that's a caveat with that. We have our second defenseman here that's riding. In an ideal world, you know, we'd love to just do different colors and we can run it where if it's a 5-minute drill segment, you know, blue's going to be on defense for 2 minutes, and then you switch or whatever. But just for the sake of this, I don't want you guys to get confused. 26 and 35 are riding, and then 50 and I want to say 30 will be clearing here. But we've also got, sorry about that. And I'll run this back without talking to you guys, but we've also got our goalie up here. Ideally, we want him to be a little bit deeper. And again, he's like hunting those hashes and just, you know, following the ball and not getting planted. But as this goes, you can see we do this incorrectly. We never look up. My man, Matt Muir, does a great job looking up here, switching hands, throwing sidearm. And then Carson does a great job of looking up, which we love, stick in the lane. And we get a piece of it. And then Will does a great job of breaking up field here. But I'll run that back because I know that's a lot coming at you guys. But like I said, we certainly want to encourage creativity, and you'll see it here. But again, those points of emphasis of looking up every single time. Matt does a great job there. And then again with that too, is like we don't want to breed robots or cultivate robots, I should say. So not everything has to be overhand, especially if a guy's match and stick. And then I also think it's just imperative to be able to get up and out. And then one of the things I've toyed around with, we didn't get to do it this past fall, but you can also add, if you guys can see my cursor right here behind our goalie, you can also put a cage in there and then a little crease. So your goalies are conscious of, you know, in and out and stuff like that. And then it also puts a little bit of skin in the game, right? Your guys can ride it back. Obviously with the kind of the concession of you have defensemen using real lacrosse balls shooting on a goalie from 3 yards away. So, you know, big risk, big reward. But this is something that I've taken with me from my high school days, and I think is, you know, definitely a staple of what we do at Colby. Yeah, so this is demoed incorrectly. So we want Will to be a little deeper. But what he's doing is he's just hunting the ball like you would have a midfielder, right? Like just in between the hashes coming back. He's part of the clearing group. So it's a 3v2, and then this guy is just your forward outlet. Does that make sense? Yeah. Anytime after 12 seconds. So that's something we'll tell him, and hopefully you have a visual representation from a shot clock or whatever it may be. But anytime after 12 seconds, he can call for the ball, and then we just get up and out. Or he can wait until 19 seconds and use the whole like clearing clock or whatever. But no, they're in the box. So for all intents and purposes, he's not part of the drill outside of being an outlet. Does that answer your question? Awesome. All right, so the last drill that I'm going to show you guys, and then I'll kind of open it up more formally for questions and stuff like that. But our third drill is our 4v3 rectangle passing. The way that I like to think about it is that we want to develop offensive defensemen. So cultivating the complete defenseman with an offensive mindset. I kind of struggle with the wording of this, and what I, you know, in hindsight, what I should have done is just said, we just want to develop lacrosse players, right? Like if you're a big stick or a short stick, it doesn't matter. You're a lacrosse player. And, you know, for our guys, we have a rule, first 3 over are push and transition, right? So that could be a goalie, a faceoff guy, and a pole. That could be 3 poles. It doesn't matter. Like you were a lacrosse player. And I joke with Coach Dowd all the time. And one of the things that he's coined is like, if we have a guy on our roster who we don't trust to shoot from 10 yards with their hands free, that guy probably shouldn't be playing college lacrosse, right? So we got to recruit better. And I think we've done a great job of that. But there's going to be 3 separate iterations of this. The first one will just be straight up. The second one will involve skip passes. And then the third one we'll add a crease player, and we can kind of talk about the caveats and you know, the different points of emphasis with that. But from a defensive perspective, we really want to be cognizant of our pacing, of our approach and our recovery. So again, our stick out in front, and then we want to follow our stick to the inside. Like I said, I really like for our guys to switch hands. But one of the things that you'll see, and I think it's awesome to have that offensive perspective as well, is that we want to get out. We want to have a solid approach, whether that's a flat approach, we're, you know, dictating a side, whatever it may be. But as soon as that ball moves, we don't want to be sitting out there having a conversation about, you know, computational biology or whatever it may be. Like we want to get inside and take away those skip lanes. Again, you know, stop me if you've heard this point of emphasis before, but that communication aspect, we want to be declarative. And something for this too, with the second iteration, when we have skips, is we want to eliminate that ambiguity. So it doesn't need to be a situation where it's like, I got him, you take him kind of thing. One of the things that I've taken away from some of my other stops, and you'll see the field set up here in a little bit, but if we have a defenseman that's playing that pipe and that skip does happen from the opposite pipe to the, far right corner for the sake of argument, we want to be exceedingly slow to leave the base. But if we do leave the base, we have to be super quick to fill it. And that's something that you can start to interject and have your guys understand conceptually. And you'll see what I mean visually here in a second. And then last but not least, the spacing. One of the things that I talk with our guys all the time is that we're really fortunate to have a football field and have hash marks, but I think hash marks a lot of ways are the kiss of death. You don't want to be in a position where you're doing all this stuff, your guys have great landmarks, and then you go to a field that's just lacrosse, and they're like, where are the yards? So that's something for us we really want to be cognizant of. Again, those skip lanes and then recovering to the hat, right? Having our stick inside, not jogging in, taking our time, but that violence of action and that purposeful movement ultimately. And then from an offensive perspective, our guys that are on the outside, stick work is a huge consideration. Free play, not robotic. We want to throw hard passes. Like nobody gets better throwing lollipops. So we want to put that thing on a rope. And again, you don't need to be a robot. If somebody matches stick, you can pump, you can throw underneath, you can throw behind the back. We want guys to be creative. And again, the first time that they're doing this should be in practice and, not in a game. So that's definitely something I'm a big stickler about. I think something with this too, that's really awesome and kind of opened our guys' eyes is that vision. When we talk about those skip lanes opening up, when you have that from an offensive perspective, you see if somebody is dilly-dallying, you can, send that skip. So I think it does help to have two sides of the ball so you really understand from an offensive perspective, like what we're giving up or, what the look is or whatever. And then ultimately that helps in the transition game, right? And then last but not least, again, the communication aspect. Every single pass gets communicated. That's something I say ad nauseum. And then just, be declarative again, like name, action, all that good stuff. You can never talk too much. I joke with guys at recruiting events all the time, but there's not a college coach that's going to go up to a player and be like, hey man, like shut up, you talk too much in the field, right? So I think it's important to flush those things out and, actively encourage that in your program. So our rectangle passing here, this will be the setup. Again, I know I said don't use the hashes, and then I put this right on the hashes, but these can be a little bit outside, a little bit inside. But again, you really just want to create those landmarks without hashes in the event that you're not playing on a field that uses hashes. You'll have 3 guys inside, and then your 4 defensive players on the outside. The caveat with this, as well as a goalie inside, again, with this, I think it is really important to eliminate, that dead goalie time, and it's something for him that he's able to, talk to his defenseman, get more comfortable, and then especially for these skips, that step, being able to clean up our footwork, keep our pad level the same, which is, a conversation for another time. But the caveat with this over here is that this can be a goalie or a defenseman. I really like to have a goaltender in here, again, just because they're people too. They can get their stick work in, and then it just makes the subbing easier on the back end. So it's just these 3 guys replace these 3 guys, and then you go from there. But like I said, the first one that you'll see is just straight up. So the ball will start here. There's no skips. It can just go around the perimeter. And what we want to see from our defensemen is that they're getting out, they're approaching under control. When the ball moves, if it's over their right shoulder, they're opening up to their right. If it's over their left shoulder, they're opening up to their left. We're never turning our back to the ball, and we're following our stick to the inside and recovering inside. So that'll be our first iteration. So got our stick out in front. Preston, again, does a great job switching hands, getting inside. And then our spacing too. I think we're certainly a little condensed here, but again, this is something that, we can continue to coach our guys out of habits and things like that. And then having our goaltender on the outside. And then again, you've got your goaltender physically engaged, getting reps. And at the end of the day, there's so many touches with this, put like a 20, 30-second shot clock on this, have your guys work, and then just exchange on the backside. So, or the back end, I should say. So that's our first iteration with that. The second one, if this loads. The second one, we've opened up our skips. So you'll see right off the bat, my man Matt Muir throws a fantastic lob pass. And, this is kind of the thing that you'll have to work with through these guys. But again, all those points of emphasis are the same. And we really want to hammer home getting in and taking away those skip lanes. The other thing that I really wanted to point out here, and you'll see it here, right here. Best day ever if we pick this pass, right? But what I really want to teach our guys, and if you have guys that are stat hungry or however you reach them best, I think it's really hard for an offensive player to catch the ball if he doesn't physically have his stick in his hand. So we want the ball to carry us out to our man. We don't want to sell out for the nugget. So this is another little like aspect that you can introduce to your guys. We want to arrive in hands and kind of get away from this Zorro, Ole, one hand on the stick. And then we'll see a pattern start to develop here with this skip. And, something that I would tell our guy, Will Bainbridge here, as this goes, number 40. As he goes and approaches, he's kind of dilly-dallying here, and he's opening up that skip lane. So that's something where those guys on the outside can tell him, like, you see how you're opening this up? Yeah, you can certainly do that. I think, competition is inherent to everything you're doing. So you can certainly score everything. And again, kind of like we talked about with the alley clearing, you could just be like, Blue's going to be on defense for 2 minutes and we're going to score that and go back and forth. But that's a great way to make it more competitive for sure. And then last but not least here, this third iteration that we have. So this is one where we'll have a player inside. And again, that just kind of changes, what we're doing a little bit in the fact that we want to be really cognizant of that player inside. We still want to get out, break down, have our stick in the proper position. But we do want to have some skin in the game as well. If he is fortunate enough to catch this inside, not have his hands taken off, he can attempt to shoot and score. But one of the things I like to tell our guys is that we don't have friends inside. Obviously, it's practice, so within good reason, but that's a great collapse. And then a wonderful save here from Will Heisler. So just 3 different iterations of the same drill. And like I said, you can make that as competitive as you'd like, or however you see fit. But I think that's something for us. Those are really our core identity and things that, we take a lot of pride in. But just with that, we'll wrap it up here in a second, just open it up for some more Q&A. But the big thing that I want to leave you guys with is, always keep the bigger picture in mind. It's all about the holistic development of players. And like I said before, I think sports is a microcosm of life. So not to get overly philosophical, but it is really important, those lessons that you're teaching guys. It's not what you teach, it's what you emphasize. Coming prepared, doing things right, paying attention to the details. And then ultimately, these are things that your guys will take. I'm sure everybody in this room has an anecdote or something that your elementary school coach told you and it sticks with you, and you are that guy for your players. So it's important to understand your impact that you have. Control the controllables. Something again that Coach Dowd has heard me say ad nauseum, but something I wholeheartedly and unequivocally believe in is that well done is better than well said, and show me, right? It's one thing to talk about it, but show me that you understand. Show me you're doing the right thing. And then especially, just being a coach, this is something that's really stuck with me, is that perfect is not the enemy of good. Drills look great on paper. Like I said before, you go out and it's, a mixed bag. You have to be prepared to experiment with what works and what doesn't, make it your own, put your own tweaks on it, but understand not everything's going to be perfect. And you want to be in a position where you can adjust. And the last thing that we want, especially as coaches and then down to our players, is going palms up, right? But with that being said, would certainly love to open it up to, questions, comments, hopefully not too many concerns, but any questions that I can address for you guys? Yeah, absolutely. You can go more of a diamond as opposed to a traditional box. But again, I think that's the thing of being able to tweak it and make it your own inherently. And then again, with that, I think there's so many caveats with how you want that passing to be. You can certainly throw ground balls in. And then for your guys, whether it is like you saw when we, if I can just run it back here. But when we do this initially, our guys are kind of just approaching, and then there's not really that recovery piece. So what we want to do is have them, address the ball carrier, open up to the inside, and then switch. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. This is again, kind of just a progression of, we have that super solid approach, and then we can add on the recovery and stuff. But you can do whatever. You could add more lines, however you want to do it. But fantastic question. The way that we've done it traditionally has always been in that quadrant, because for us, it's just more with that limited time consideration, and really just trying to get touches with that. Something that we'll build on as well, and I don't have it dialed up or anything. But again, coaching is just stealing ideas that you like and renaming them. But one of the things that I've heard that like your college will do is that they'll have that 30-second clearing clock. And what they'll do is they'll just basically go 3/4 to the field. And then, it's just obviously you get it over the midfield line with that 20-second clock, but then you just play pass. And that's one of those things. And of course, you can add a carry, whether it's like a drop 3-3 or, experiment with a 10-man or anything like that. So I think like it's really up to you with what you want to do, but that's a good wrinkle for sure. And something too that you can throw in with the time constraint or whatever it may be. But great question. Anything else? Yeah, so with that, right, it's always prioritizing like who's the most dangerous threat. And then I think at the end of the day, like if you put it in that game situation, if there's a man on the crease who's going to be naked, if you rotate off of that to like a 12-yard step down, we want to give our goalie a chance with the 12-yard as opposed to that top down feed. So with that, we'd love to get, the other thing that I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on is you can start to, integrate and teach those like scrapes, or if a guy can get across ball to ball, fantastic. But to your point of whether it's going to be a skip, we're going to send the closest guy. But like I said before, we want to be really, really reluctant and really slow to leave the base or leave the crease, whoever the more dangerous guy is, and then exceedingly, fast to fill that. But again, it's just at the end of the day, like it's a bad situation, but who would you rather see that shot coming from? And 10 times out of 10, I'd rather see that 12-yard step down as opposed to a dunk on the crease. So that's like my methodology. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions I can answer for you guys? Well, awesome. That's my time. Thank you guys so much.